Hi guys, let's talk about ecosystems. Okay, so to start off with, we have biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem. Biotic means stuff that's living, right? Abiotic means stuff that's non-living, okay? So biotic things would be like trees, plants, animals, those are all living things. Abiotic things would be like the weather, air, water, rocks, soil, stuff that was never alive, never will be alive, okay? The sun is another example. You have to be careful because if something used to be alive, it's still considered biotic, right? Like a dead tree, even though it's dead, it's not alive anymore. It was alive, so it is considered biotic. Okay, here's some examples of biotic things. Bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, all biotic things are living things. Let's talk about the levels of organization in an ecosystem. So obviously the smallest living thing is a cell, right? It's the basic unit of life. When I have one individual thing, right, the living thing, we call that an organism. Okay, so an organism is a single living thing. If I have the same type of organism, the same species of organism, that is called a population. So you could say like the population of tuna fish, or the population of jackrabbits, or the population of coyotes here in Texas. That's all one type of one species, right? So it's called a population, a group of the same kind of organism. And they're also living in the same area so that they can interact with each other. So they're like competing with each other or working together. They can mate with each other, but they're close enough to where they're going to interact with each other somehow. Then I have a community. That's the next level. A community is going to be different organisms. So in this case, right, it's the tuna fish plus the octopus plus the sea stars. It's going to be living things, right? Living together, living near each other so that they can affect each other either through competition or predator-prey relationships, things like that. But now I have different species of things living together. That's a community. Here in Texas, it would be like the jackrabbits plus the coyotes plus the deer. All of that is going to be part of the community. Plants included, right? I can include mesquite trees and things like that in there. It's going to be a bunch of different living things, different species of living things make up a community. Then when I add in the abiotic things, that's going to be what makes up the ecosystem. So the ecosystem is going to be all of the communities, right? All of the living things plus the abiotic environment. So you're adding in the sun, the water, the air, the sand. All of that together makes up the ecosystem. All of the ecosystems put together, right? Like we're talking about the rainforest plus the Arctic plus the desert and the ocean and everything. All of those make up the biosphere. And we will talk a little bit more about this as we go along, right? And we're going to be getting into solar system later on in the year. Okay, so here's some examples of living and non-living things interacting with each other, like a bear needs a cave, right? The lizard warms its body in the sun, a fish swims in the water. This is biotic things dependent upon abiotic things. And then biotic things depending on biotic things, right? Squirrels gathering nuts, right? Because it's going to eat them in the winter. The billed bird's a nest in a tree. Sloths live in trees. Those are biotic things interacting with each other in an ecosystem. So a habitat is where an organism lives, and a niche or niche is going to be the role that the organism plays in an ecosystem. I think of the ecosystem as kind of like a giant puzzle, right? Like you can think of a rainforest ecosystem. All of the organisms in that ecosystem play a role in that ecosystem, whether it be like predator, prey, they could have a symbiotic relationship, right? They're herbivore or carnivore, things like that. You cannot take a puzzle piece and force it into another place in the puzzle, right? It has a place where it belongs, and that's the niche of that organism. So let's talk about consumers and producers, and we need to know these words, heterotroph and autotroph. A consumer is going to be something that eats something else, right? Like decomposers, omnivores, carnivores, herbivores. And they are also called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers. They have to eat something else, okay? They're going to be eating another organism. Autotrophs don't have to do any eating. They are going to be able to make their own energy. Like plants are an example of an autotroph. Producers are autotrophs, right? They're getting getting energy from the sun through photosynthesis. They're not having to be consumers, right? Another example is not just photosynthesis, right, with plants, but what's called chemosynthesis. There's organisms that live at the very bottom of the ocean. They live around hydrothermal vents, and they're able to get chemicals from these vents that basically are leaking gases, and chemicals and minerals and things are coming out from Earth's crust, and they're able to take those chemicals and make food out of them, right? They make energy out of them. And so that's called chemosynthesis. So those would also be autotrophs. I remember this because I think they automatically get energy, right? Plants look like they're just automatically getting energy from the sun. And so those are autotrophs. They're not consumers. They don't have to eat another, right? They're able to make their own energy using chemicals. Okay, this is an example of a food chain. What's really important with food chains is arrows, right? It's all going to start with the sun, and then the energy from the sun goes to the producers, or the grass down here at the bottom, right? And then the energy from the grass goes to the mouse, and then the energy from the mouse goes to the carnivore, which happens to be an eagle here, okay? And then also to the decomposers down here, right? Decomposers can eat any one of these things. So make sure that you're drawing your arrows going in the correct direction, showing the flow of energy. So here's some examples of herbivores, right? Herbivores eat plants, just to review really quick. Carnivores eat meat. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. Scavengers are going to not really be hunters, but they kind of scavenge stuff that's already dead. And decomposers are going to be kind of like nature's recyclers, right? They're the ones that break down all the dead organisms back into nutrients to go back in the soil so that plants can use them. Really quickly, I wanted to talk about the carbon cycle and really respiration and photosynthesis, okay? So plants, right, we know about photosynthesis. Let's start with photosynthesis. Plants use energy from the sun and water and carbon dioxide to make oxygen, right? We breathe in that oxygen, and we actually make carbon dioxide gas, okay, that the plants can use. So it's kind of like they are making oxygen for us, and we take in that oxygen and we make carbon dioxide for them. And so respiration is what we do, right? Respirar, right? We take energy from plants and food and stuff, and we eat it, and we're making carbon dioxide as part of respiration. So again, right, this is kind of like it going round and round and round, right? Plants produce oxygen, right? Animals and people produce carbon dioxide for plants. So that is what respiration, this is photosynthesis down here, and then respiration is with the blue arrow. Let's talk a little bit more about food chains. Here's a few examples of food chains, like in the ocean, right? Again, please make sure that you are drawing your arrows in the correct direction, right? The arrows are showing the flow of energy. So the energy is going from the sun to the plants here, right? And then up the food chain, right? For example, here we have the phytoplankton, the krill, the largefish, and the shark. That's the flow of energy. Here's another example, right? Sunshine going to the grass, gets eaten by the snail, gets eaten by the bird. Arrows showing the flow of energy. Let's talk about food webs. Food webs are going to be a bunch of food chains put together, right? It's showing basically all of the predator-prey or consumer-producer relationships within an ecosystem. And the more organisms you have, right, the more biodiverse it is, the better, the healthier the ecosystem is. So here you can see multiple arrows going from certain organisms. They're getting eaten by multiple organisms, and then these guys are eating multiple organisms, right? Like, for example, the eagle eats the snake, and it eats the squirrel, and so on. Here are a couple more examples of some food webs. Here's one in the ocean, right? At the bottom here you have producers and plankton and things, and then it goes up the food chain there. Here you can see a mosquito, right, which is a bug. An insect is getting energy from the deer. Is that true? Yes. Does it eat the whole deer? No, but it drinks its blood, right? So it's getting energy from the deer, right? We even have a spider here that eats the mosquito. So again, flow of energy. Now, an energy pyramid is going to show us the amount of energy that's available within a food chain. So there's a reason why it's really big at the bottom. That's trying to show you that that's where the most energy is contained in a food chain, right? It's at the bottom where we start with the producers. So we're always going to start at the bottom of our energy pyramid with a producer. Only 10% of the energy goes up from trophic level to trophic level as the energy flow goes, right? So for example, here we have a bunny, okay? So this bunny is eating this grass, okay? Only 10% is going to go up to the snake because this bunny is spending some of that energy, right? When it eats the grass, 100% of that grass energy is not going to end up with the snake because the bunny used some of that energy looking for more grass, looking for a little place to live, right? Looking for a bunny girlfriend, right? It's spending energy. It's kind of like if you become a millionaire, right? 100% of your money is not going to be left to your kids. You're going to buy things, right? You're going to buy food and you're going to buy a house or cars and, you know, pay for gas and things like that, right? So you spend some of the money that you earn. So your kids are only going to get a certain percentage of that, right? What you haven't used up. And so the same thing here, right? The bunny is going to use up some of the energy that it got from the grass. So not 100% of it, right, is going to go up to the snake. Only 10% goes from trophic level to trophic level. So that's why it gets smaller and smaller, right? Our pyramid gets smaller and smaller as we get towards the top. Over here, we have an example in the ocean. Here's another example, right, with plankton down here at the bottom, right? This is my producer. And then I have what's called my primary consumer, primero, right? My first eater, my second eater, right? Secondary consumer, and my tertiary consumer, my third eater, okay? And so less and less energy is available as I go up, right? It's only going to be 10%. Here's the example that you are going to write down in your notes. So feel free to hit pause right here and write down these examples. This is the picture from your book that you need to cut out and glue into your journal. Here's another example that's labeling the primary, and secondary consumers and stuff. And this one actually goes all the way to quaternary, right? So I actually have 4 consumers, 4 eaters here. Okay, let's talk about biodiversity. Biodiversity is how much diversity I have of life, right? Diversity means different things. When you have an ecosystem that is very biodiverse, that's a good thing. You want a biodiverse ecosystem. You want lots of different plants and animals, because if something goes wrong, then there's a chance that there's other things to eat, or they can basically correct for whatever disaster has happened in the ecosystem, and there's going to be other opportunities for consumers to eat and things. So there's 2 types of biodiversity. We have genetic biodiversity and ecological biodiversity. I'm going to start with ecological. This picture of the turtle in the ocean is a good example of ecological biodiversity. This is what I was talking about, like lots of different producers, lots of different consumers, right? I have lots of different primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. You want lots of different animals, lots of different plants in the ecosystem, because like, let's say something comes out and it wipes out all of like one type of fish. If there's other fish to eat, then those consumers, right, the predators that were eating those fish, they have other options. So they will still survive because they can find some other food. But if you only have one type of fish and they all die, well, then that's going to mess up the whole food chain, right, in that ecosystem. Genetic biodiversity is diversity within a population. For example, cheetahs were suffering with some very low genetic biodiversity because they were hunted almost to extinction. What that means is you don't want relatives breeding with relatives, right? You don't want brother and sister cheetahs having cubs, because that's going to lead to the offspring not being very viable. They're not going to be very healthy, okay? And so what they've done in Africa is they've started to move around individuals to kind of mix up the population. So they'll take like cheetahs from northern Africa and trade them with cheetahs that are in southern Africa to get that genetic biodiversity going, right? You want the individuals to breed with individuals that they're not closely related to. The importance of biodiversity, it helps maintain the sustainability of an ecosystem. So let's talk about that word. Sustainability means that something will last. Like if something bad happens, right? Like let's say there's a disease that wipes out a certain kind of tree. There's other trees, right, that organisms can eat, or the other trees that animals can use as habitat, right? So that ecosystem will continue on. It will be able to sustain itself. It will last because there's other options within that ecosystem. If there's only one type of tree and they all die, well, then that's going to really affect all the rest of the organisms that are there. And chances are the ecosystem will not survive. 3 threats to biodiversity within an ecosystem. I actually put 4 here. First off, habitat loss will affect ecosystems because basically you're taking away habitat from animals, right? This is an example of deforestation due to palm oil plantations. So palm oil is in a lot of things that you buy, like shampoos and lotions and stuff. It's what makes them creamy. And they cut down a lot of rainforest in order to grow palm trees to be able to harvest the palm oil. And so that's habitat loss. Pollution, I put a picture of an oil spill. I think we all know what pollution is, right? Overfishing is when we fish for a certain type of fish too much. What happens is we can really decimate the population and not leave any breeding adults in the water. And so then they're not able to basically reproduce, right, and replace themselves because we're killing too many adults that are the ones having the babies, right? So no more babies. An invasive species, I think of like an alien invader. This is when you have a species that doesn't belong there gets introduced. Like the lionfish belongs in the Pacific Ocean and it was introduced to the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't have any natural predators there. Nothing eats it there. And so that means that its population basically exploded, okay? And it's taking away resources from organisms that actually do belong. So here's an example of a low biodiversity ecosystem and a higher biodiversity ecosystem, right? So for example, let's say something happens and these beetles are all killed off, okay? So somebody sprays a pesticide or something and all of the beetles here die. Then the scorpion has nothing to eat. Okay, so all of the scorpions are going to die off. And so then that's going to give the roadrunner half of the food that it had, right? So that's going to be pretty bad for the ecosystem. But let's say all of these beetles die over here, right? These guys die. And if you notice, right, there's so many arrows here. There's so many more options for these animals to eat that they're going to be okay, right? They're not going to be, super affected because they have other options to eat. Okay, so that's why high biodiversity is a good thing. Here's another example where this one has a predator at the top. Predators are also important, right? Predators will keep populations in check. For example, over here, the bullyfish does not have any natural predators, so it's going to basically multiply, right? And it can wipe out whatever it eats and take resources away from other animals that eat the same things that it eats, right? Over here, we have a trout that will eat the bullyfish, and so it'll keep the bullyfish population in check. Here, I'm going to go ahead and reveal all of this, so you can pause this and copy this. This is basically just examples of all of these different types of ecosystems. Okay, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.